Okay, welcome to the March 6th meeting of the Amherst Planning Board. I'll note the absence of our chair this evening. I will be doing my best to fill in for his capable shoes tonight in running the meeting. The first item on our agenda is are the minutes from our February 6th meeting. Are there any comments or corrections to the minutes?
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Second?
Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? That is, how many of us are there?
abstaining.
7-0 with one abstention. Thank you. Okay, we have on our agenda tonight 3 public hearings for zoning amendments that will be on the warrant for this spring's town meeting. But it's a bit of a scheduling issue because the first 2 of them, as we discussed at our last meeting, our intention will be to continue the public hearings, I believe. But I will open the first one at this point because it is 7:05. So in accordance with the provisions of sections 5 and 11 of chapter 40A, these public hearings have been duly advertised and notice thereof has been posted and mailed to the Mass Department of Housing and Community Development, the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission, and abutting towns. These hearings are being held for the purpose of providing an opportunity for interested citizens to be heard regarding the proposed amendments to the Amherst zoning bylaw. These amendments will be on the warrant for this annual town meeting. 7:05 p.m. A 1313 mixed-use building standards and conditions. To amend the standards and conditions for section 3.325 of the zoning bylaw to increase the number of upper floor dwelling units permitted in a mixed-use building by right, allowing dwellings on the first floor and increase the first floor area supporting upper floor residential uses. I'll ask the board if there are any conflicts of interest with regard to this article. Seeing none. I'll turn to my colleague on the zoning subcommittee to see if you'd like to introduce the article to have a discussion about it, or what you think is the right way of proceeding on this, Mr. Crowner?
So I think, as you pointed out, we had agreed to continue the hearing, but I think it is worth starting the discussion because the zoning subcommittee has pretty much finished working on this article. So the article as it currently is drafted is what we're happy with. And so, but we want to be sure that the planning board agrees with us. And so now is a chance for us to talk about it, to get some feedback from the public conceivably, and possibly when we actually vote next time around, it might be something different. But so what it is the issue is that mixed-use buildings, which are buildings that contain both commercial uses and residential uses, these are the only kinds of potential residential uses that are allowed in the commercial district, which was a significant part of previous rezoning efforts of the North Amherst Village Center. And I would also note that the commercial district is on the College Street East Amherst Village Center area. So those are the main places where the commercial zone exists. The issue is that it's difficult in the current market to develop commercial uses. The market is in Hadley, where the rents are smaller. So people are, property owners would prefer to be able to develop mixed-use buildings with more residential use, so that they can, so that it makes it financially feasible for them to develop them. They don't have to rely on a commercial tenant to make the mortgage, in other words. But the way the zoning bylaw currently works, it's difficult to get enough residential use in there to make it worthwhile. So these changes that we're proposing raise the threshold at which a special permit is required for increase residential use in mixed-use buildings. And they further allow the potential for residential use on the ground floor where that is currently not allowed. We're proposing that if there is residential use on the ground floor, that it be located in the rear of the building, not on a public way, including not necessarily on the street, but on places where people regularly walk or use. So it has to be in the rear. And finally, we are told by architects that the associated floor space limit right now is 10% for residential associated floor space that is associated with residential uses on upper floors. It's 10% limit now. We're told that that's not quite enough to accommodate current stairways and elevators and other things that are necessary for residential use. So we're proposing a slightly larger number there. The committee, I guess I should mention that there is a couple of points where we're still looking for guidance. We've done our discussion, but now it's time for you to join the discussion. And that's in the first paragraph where up to 12 units would be allowed before a special permit would kick in. That number, we're proposing, or a consensus on the zoning subcommittee is to make that number 10, but it could be something else. It could be 12, it could be more than that, it could be 6, it could be 8. And the other one is whether to put a limit on the total amount of residential space on the ground floor, including the associated use and the ground floor residential use. And we have not come to a consensus on that, but that's an option that you should consider.
Could you repeat the last point regarding space on the first floor?
Okay, so right now, under current conditions, there's no ground floor residential use. However, you can have up to 10% of the ground floor associated with upper floor residential use. We're proposing two changes: increase that percentage that's associated with upper floors and allow possibly ground floor use in the rear of the building. Should we limit the total amount of residential use to some number, 25% or something, including both the 15% and the ground floor residential use?
Mr. Carson?
The reason why we were discussing this is the possibility that you could have the 15% associated with the upper stories and then have the ground floor unit, and then the section that would be for commercial could become very, very small, unless there was a required minimum or maximum.
Okay. So you have not, is it correct that you have not voted on a recommendation on this article yet? Okay. So what you're looking for here tonight is input from the board, input from the public, which you'll intend to take back and potentially make changes for the final version of this. So our intention is that we'll have a discussion here, we'll hear feedback from the public, and then we'll continue the public hearing without making a planning board vote this evening. Does that match
Yes.
your expectation?
Mhm.
Great. All right, questions or comments from the board? Ms. Anderson?
Mr. Crowner and the committee.
Microphone.
Oh, yeah.
I've been away so long.
I know. You missed me. What could the possible downside to this be? I mean, this looks, this looks like a good thing, except for the percentage of residential allowable use getting too big and commercial getting too small. I mean, what comes to mind is the building that's behind Judy's as a mixed-use building, the newest one in the area, I believe. The first floor is supposed to be commercial, and I think second through fourth or fifth floors are residential. Although I don't see anybody in the first floor yet, but.
Scandinavians is coming.
Huh?
Scandinavians is coming.
Scandinavians is coming, that's correct. So I guess my first question is a general one to the subcommittee is, I mean, is there any downside to this article? I mean, it looks like a win-win to me. encourages development and whatnot. And then I have a second question, but it was just, who would vote against it? I mean, why?
Mr. Crowder.
You'll hear who would vote against it soon, I'm sure. But let me summarize the downside.
This is Amherst after all.
So both commercial districts are close to residential areas. And so what we're talking about is allowing more residence use near other residential areas. So that's a concern for people. The second potential concern is, as Bruce was saying, that we might create mixed-use buildings that are not really mixed use. They're residential buildings with a tiny little commercial space or something. And what we actually want to do is particularly in mixed-use centers, is we want to have mixed-use buildings as well as a mix of uses in the area.
Right. Well, and then my part two was, at first I didn't see a downside to, or a reason to limit the number of residential units on the first floor. It's very hard to do that when you don't really know what the gross square footage is of a building, because the buildings are mythical at this point. But your point, I think, is a good one, and maybe there needs to be a percentage. I would think now that there might need to be a percentage of the first floor needs to still be commercial versus residential. What that is, I would leave that to more architectural minds than my own as to what that should be. But, with the fact that it's in the rear of the building, okay, because the commercial is supposed to be facing front, facing the pedestrian, facing the walkways, sort of the business district concept. But I would just start the conversation that I think it should be a percentage, and somebody else maybe can recommend what that should be. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? So I'll step in and echo Ms. Anderson's point there. I think that I'm still not quite sure about the increase in the number of units that would trigger the special permit requirement, but I do think that having a requirement for basically a set aside for commercial space on the ground floor is a good idea, because there is a risk that you would have a de minimis commercial usage, just enough to qualify as a mixed-use building, and that's, I think, not what we're trying to encourage. So I think that the percentage is probably the best way to go, but I also couldn't speculate on what that number would or should be.
50%, I was just, that is exactly what came to
50%,
mind.
yeah.
Yeah, 50%, yeah,
50%.
would work.
I was thinking that too.
Exclusive of those
Right.
necessary areas, stairwells, elevator shafts, utility rooms,
So 50% of the remainder.
of the remainder.
Of the non-15.
I think we need to, we need to be clear on that.
Right. So I guess my inclination might be 50% of the overall, rather than, because if you've already set aside now up to 15% for accessory uses associated with the residential stuff, then you're starting with 85% of the building. So you're saying something on the order of 40 or 45% of the building would be commercial potentially. I guess 50 overall sounds like a better number to me, but that's just uninformed. Mr. Crowner.
Actually would propose a smaller number. I think so. So there will be different sizes of mixed-use buildings, and maybe in a smaller mixed-use building, we only really want 15%, and we don't want to even encourage. We don't even want people to think about, well, maybe I can squeeze in something. So maybe a smaller percentage, so that it really only kicks in when you're talking about a larger building. So I would suggest maybe 25% or 30%. As a max overall,
Now you're talking about 25 or 35%,
including the 15.
right, but not
Residential or of
Residential.
commercial?
Residential.
residential.
Oh,
Okay,
okay.
we were saying 50% would be commercial.
Minimum commercial, yeah.
And I think Mr. Crowner is advocating for a higher percentage
Right,
than that.
so it would be
but-
75% commercial, yeah.
Mr. Schreiber?
So I don't know, I don't have the facts to back this up, but I think that the commercial in the aforementioned Boltwood Place is actually relatively small, because that future Scandinavian space, I would guess, is no more than a quarter of the footprint, because the interior hallways, they have indoor garbage storage. I think they have some storage for the units above. So, you know, if we're using that as a baseline,
Well, that, I guess that, if I may, that would be a question. Is that the baseline you want?
it quacks like a mixed-use building to me. Walks like a mixed-use building.
I think not everyone agrees with that, yeah.
Really?
I mean, I think it's fine, but some people don't.
So I'll point out that the difference from what we're considering here from the Boltwood Place is that Boltwood Place does not have residential uses on the ground floor. They have the associated stuff, but there's no residential unit on the ground floor. There's mechanical equipment, there's HVAC.
And they're way above, if I may.
Sure.
Yeah, they're way above 15%, I would guess, but I don't think that didn't apply in this case, did it, the 15%? Yeah.
We haven't created it yet.
Right, because those
Well,
provisions
the
only apply in the
preview.
COM district.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
isn't COM.
So, just to pursue this, because it's not gonna be any easier to decide this in the subcommittee. If no more than 50% can be residential, including the 15%, if a particular building didn't need the 15%, maybe it didn't have an elevator, or it was just more, they could have more residential space. If they needed the 15%, then they would only have 35% available for residential use, and 50% would be preserved for commercial. So do you still feel that would 35% residential, not plus the 15% is too great a residential use? I'm just,
I think
You think-
potentially it is, yeah.
you think it's,
So I think in individual cases, it would be fine.
right,
But
But-
we're also trying to make
Right.
it this passed.
well, so what would be a number that you think that you think more people would be comfortable with?
I would say 25 to 30% max,
Of residential.
including the
Including-
15%. Yeah.
Okay, and follow up, and if that was the case, and the situation that Ms. Kruger mentioned about not, let's say they didn't need the common space, there's no elevator, there's very little HVAC stuff, and, you know, maybe it's not a brand-new building like that, could that be added to residential? Triggering just, you know, or does that, so in other words, there's up to 15% can be stairwells and things like that for second floor access, but if they only need 10%, where's that 5 go? You know, in the language, we ought to be clear that any leftovers, where do the leftovers go, basically?
Good point.
It would almost seem to me that if we're going to allow residential use on the first floor, and we're gonna set an upper limit for residential use overall, it might be worthwhile just having that limit on the overall, and not to try to break it down 15% for the accessory use and 20% for the residential unit itself. That might be cutting it a little bit too fine. Ms. Kruger?
Well, we always try, I mean, I think in quarters, 25, 50, but maybe the split is 40, 60, because then you could have 25% for unit space, 15% if you needed it, and still 60%. It's a slightly different number, but it's kind of massaging the 50-50. So it could be, maybe, I would recommend 60-40. I think it's to prevent gaming the system. I'm ready to open up Connie's umbrella rental kiosk, which only needs about 10 square feet.
Food cart storage area.
Okay, so I don't think that we necessarily need to pin that down right at this moment, but I think that you've heard a consensus from the board favoring an upper limit on residential uses at some number that's probably less than 50%, and I agree with Ms. Kruger that 40 sounds reasonable to me, so, can you guys work with that?
Okay.
All right. Any other questions or comments from the board before we hear from the public? All right, seeing none, I'll open it to questions from the public. I'll ask you to come up and use the table at the front here and speak into the mic so that they can hear you on TV. Tell us who you are and where you live, and direct your comments to the board, please. Ms. Keller.
Janet Keller, Precinct 1. I think our concern, and I want to say that I'm aware that the idea was to break these up into small pieces so that the town meeting could decide on them as such, and I appreciate that. It also has another effect, which is when you put all the different.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to interrupt briefly. We're talking now about the mixed-use
Mixed use.
building, not the mixed-use center dimensions amendment.
Right. So when we take that one little piece, and you fit it to all the other pieces, and you guys know what they are, so I don't need to enumerate them, but then our concern is the overall impact. And we're still working with it and trying to see what it actually adds up to. So, but I did not want to lose the opportunity to say that that's a concern. It's especially a concern in light of the fact that the pervasive and serious problems with some unruly tenants has not as yet been solved. And we have suffered greatly from that in our neighborhood. So I just want to make those comments in regard to this piece, is that we have that concern with how this piece fits with the other piece and how it would impact our neighborhood. And we'll continue to look at it closely. Thank you.
Other comments? Ms. Perot.
Melissa Perot. At the beginning of the year, the planning board seemed to have little appetite for rezoning the village centers following their defeat at town meeting again. And the combined planning board and zoning subcommittee meeting, the North Amherst and Atkins corners were dropped from the work schedule. However, what you're proposing is definitely rezoning in these areas because it covers the whole town. I asked Mr. Tucker about why VCR was added to the zones that were being coming under this form-based design, and he explained that there was mixed-use buildings in the VCR, but that they were very low impact. The stated purpose of this refers to the master plan goal of maintaining Amherst community character and encouraging vitality in the town center and village centers as a focus for the community's economic life, cultural vigor, and social activity. This is very admirable, but the actual result appears to me will be to affect very significant zoning changes over the entire town in 6 zones to increase residential density.
Ms. Perot, I just want to interrupt you just
Please.
just to clarify what we're talking about here, because there are multiple topics on the agenda here, but they're structured
This
in
is not the
separate
form-based
This
design?
is not the form-based design, no.
This is just
We're talking specifically about
about
the
the
changes
mixed
to the
use.
regulations regarding the mixed-use
Okay.
buildings themselves here. So,
Okay, let
so
me-
your comments are applicable to the other topics, but
Okay, well,
I'll ask you to,
we'll focus on the mixed-use buildings then.
thank you.
And they will indeed provide considerably more density of residential units. The CALM designation, which we felt was very appropriate to our North Amherst area because it does provide for the commercial and business aspects that North Amherst so desperately needs, and that North Amherst so desperately does not need more rental units. We are now at 80% or more of residential units, most of which are short-term. It's resulted in the loss of our school, the loss of our local church traditional church and the hall to the Boy Scouts and other community activities, and an increasing number, of course, of houses that are being turned over to students. So we don't actually want any more or a great influx of residential units in North Amherst. It's the one thing that we have made tremendous effort to prevent, in fact, in favor of a much more economic diversity there. There's this blanket statement that occurs that economic business and opportunities in North Amherst won't fly. And I would love to know what your evidence of that is, because all the businesses in North Amherst have survived the economic downturn, and 2 of them have done extremely well. So, new ones that have come in, the new pizza place and the new laundry are doing fine. So what is the evidence that businesses cannot thrive there? And why can't we have businesses on the ground floor and reserve the additional residential units on the upper floors, as is described in CALM? This is the ideal situation. You get a little bit more residential density, we get the businesses and services that we need, and we do not drive every single one of us to Hadley or Greenfield in order to do our shopping. North Amherst has been designated a food desert. Food is one of the primary needs of human beings, and we are living in a food desert on the verge of farmland and everything else. We need to encourage that, to bring that food in and to have businesses that will process it, that will facilitate it to move on. That's what we need in North Amherst, not more people. So I urge you strongly to reconsider what you're doing in favor of something that would, in fact, provide incentives and so forth to the businesses and services that we so desperately need. This kind of mixed use would lend itself to senior housing. On the ground floor, some services for the seniors, and on the upper floor, nice apartments with balconies overlooking the hills and the sunsets. Why not? Why not? Think differently. And seniors are definitely in need. The upper floor apartments would probably be more reasonable than some ground level apartments and buildings. Let's think differently and do something that will actually benefit the area rather than continue to waste it, frankly. We've got 5 houses on Summer Street, or not 5 houses, 5 plots on Summer Street that are available to be used for housing. Why aren't people coming there? I ask you. There are 2 building lots. There's a family gutted house that needs some basic, could be brought right back to a beautifully traditional workman's house with good insulation and windows. There's another one that's in reasonable condition that could house a family that we need. There's a third one that is next to the pond there that could, with a variance, perhaps have a cafe on the ground floor and some residences units on the top floor. I mean, we need to be creative about what's there and do some infill and use the buildings that we have, and not just go plastering North Amherst with more big block residences. I'm being a bit negative, aren't I? I'm sorry, because you're all working terribly hard at this, and I just want you to be working in a different direction, and so that we can feel like we're a part of this and not constantly pushing back at you. We do have some plans, and there isn't any evidence that business, if you can produce it, I'd be happy to consider it, that business won't succeed. The Cowles Lumberyard is doing great. We have businesses there that are doing fine. What is your evidence that businesses won't do well, and why can't we have more of them and less residences? Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your comments, Ms. Pro. I think you would find that the board shares most of the statements that you just outlined for us. We certainly share or speaking for myself, I guess I can't speak for my colleagues, but I certainly share your vision for a vibrant community and bringing in the types of services that people need there. I think the evidence on the ground, though, is that the types of things that you're describing aren't being built now. The senior center with people looking at the hills and the sunsets isn't there. That residential housing, whether it's for seniors or for families or for well-behaved students, isn't there. There's no appetite for constructing that type of thing now. And so what we're talking about,
Builders will do.
correct.
The town needs.
So, but you're telling us about all the things that, you characterize the area as a food desert. There's no services there. You need a way to bring in, clearly, the absence of those services is a problem for you. You just described that as a problem. And so spurring the type of development that would bring in the services that you need there is something that I think that the area needs. So this would encourage specifically mixed use, which does include residential, but the discussion that we had here tonight was specifically about how to ensure that there's reasonable commercial aspect to that also, because we do want to make sure that there is commercial use to whatever would go in there. So what this is doing is basically raising the limit at which you would need a special permit from 6 units to some number that's larger than that, not 40 or 50, but 10 or 12. It remains to be determined exactly what that number is. But this is not a blanket change to the regulation. It's a change to the threshold at which a special permit would be required. So it might be helpful to think about it that way rather than thinking about it as a completely new way of zoning the commercial area. That's not what this would be doing.
No, I recognize that, and what you say is perfectly true. It's also perfectly true that when you put a third story on with residences in it, and then you put them on the ground floor too, that the number of cars, the number of residences, the number of people there is going to be greatly increased. We have an intersection that's already a dangerous spot. We don't want the additional traffic that residences bring. Surely the businesses will bring traffic, but it'll be daytime traffic and not nighttime traffic, and it will be hopefully sober rather than drunk. And those other aspects of the area not being taken care of, and the increase in the number of people is coming before we've got the protection of our historic homes, before we've got protection of our 2 aquifers there on either side, before we've got the traffic situation in the corner there taken care of. And we want those things taken care of, and then I think we could be very happy to allow a little bit more. But it's this going at it from this without putting the foundations in. And I think we need that. We've been saying that all along, right from the first charrette that we had. Please take care of our basics, and then we can look at what can actually function there. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tucker.
Just a quick point about carts and horses and basics. In order for the town to do the infrastructure changes, including the intersection, the actual construction of the intersection work, the extension of water and sewer in appropriate sizes into the village center and so forth, the town itself can't afford to do that. We have to go after state grants. State grants are granted on the basis of smart growth principles, which include whether or not the community has zoned its village centers in ways that allow a mix of uses, a sufficient density of uses to support the businesses that would go there, and whether or not there are, in fact, potential projects in the pipeline that the funding that the state is going to give the town for all of these improvements will help to bring those developments about. So the cart and the horse here is not, we wait for the town to spend tens of millions of dollars to do infrastructure projects. The two have to travel in tandem. In order for the town to have the funds available to do all of the work that prepares the ground, so to speak, for all of the changes that are being requested, we have to have zoning in place. We have to have the possibility of very real projects, hopefully of the best kind, which is why the board spends as much time as it does trying to get the zoning right. The town cannot intervene in the private market in the ways that it is presumed. And even if the town itself, some arm of it could, that's not the job of this body. This is the planning board, and their job principally in this kind of work is to try and develop zoning regulations that open the doors and windows. We use that metaphor so often, we should just build a little model and leave it here, that allow things to happen. They don't compel them to happen. What compels them to happen is what the private marketplace dictates is possible, the opportunities that are possible. So if the planning board appears to be trying to open some doors and windows, they are, because if those doors and windows open, then it's possible the developers and property owners would come forward with projects that would then enable the town to get the millions of dollars from the state that will be required to do all of the work that creates the infrastructure that the village center has said that it wants. You have to get these things in the right order or they don't work.
Tucker. All right, additional comments or feedback? Yes, ma'am. Yes, please use the mic so that they can hear you on TV. We have an audience of thousands watching at home.
My name is Patricia Stacy. I live on Lincoln. I hope you can just have some patience a little bit. I'll just tell you a little bit. I've spoken to you before about my experience moving here, and how difficult it has been for my family. We moved in August, and I have to say that my life has been changed significantly for the worse, having moved to my home in Lincoln Avenue, and I continually ask myself why is it that zoning laws weren't created to protect me as a consumer who bought a home in what appeared to be a very stable neighborhood. I wanted to say that, I have to say that I feel very strongly that the town of Amherst should have intervened in some way prior to my moving there to protect me as a consumer. I think that I would have benefited from a mandatory disclosure on the part of the real estate agent who represented the house. The disclosure should have said that the neighborhood is under tremendous pressure by a very disruptive population, at times even dangerous seeming, or there have been, as we've noted, there have been some deaths in our area. And there's a tremendous amount of upheaval in the neighborhood among neighbors who are really trying to turn things around, which also is another level of stress for me as a resident consumer. And then there's the other aspect of, I've spoken about my son who is begging me to move back to Northampton and has some anxieties now about being left alone in the house. He's alone now. I'd very much like to get back home soon. I don't want to be here. I don't want to have to defend my home. And that's what these people are doing right now. They're defending their home. From something that, unless you've experienced it, you cannot know what it means. Now, it seems very logical to me that when you sit here and you talk about residents, and you talk about mixed use, and as if it's a very lovely thing where you imagine, some 3-year-old running down some stairs with a mother on their way to a ballet lesson. That is not what we're talking about. You're talking about a business practice. And I think should be some language in this town that differentiates the business practice of allowing business people to come in and have business on our land, disrupt our lives significantly, and take their money and leave. Meanwhile, my taxes are incredibly high. I've had 2 flat tires since I moved here because my street is so messed up. I can't figure out, I thought I was moving to, I thought the streets were going to be paved with gold in Amherst.
Stacy, I'd ask you to stick a little bit closer to the topic
Okay.
of the specific
All right.
mixed use.
Okay,
So-
I'm just saying that the value of Amherst, the deepest value of this place is its culture, is its the richness of the families who live here, who are people like you, who provide these amazing services, who are involved in the town. And I think that the responsibility to them has to be the first responsibility, and it cannot be to a vision of, maybe the vision is wonderful that you're talking about, but the realities of opening space to businesses, and it's what is the reality, is what you're talking about, has to be considered. Its impact on the entire town. And I'm wondering where it's going to stop. I'm in a situation now where in my neighborhood, the game was, let's try to sell the families. Try to sell the families. Well, they sold to me. And I don't appreciate it. I mean, they were heroes because they sold to a family. And I said to my new neighbors, I cannot sell my house to a family. I cannot, in good conscience, sell my home to a family. It's not fair. So all of a sudden now, the only thing I can do is go into business as a rental person. I mean, what else can I do? To get out of this, what can I do? I'm just saying that please look at the realities of who's going to be living in this place, what they're going to be doing, and the impact that they're going to have on families that have lived there for decades. So thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Ms. Stacy. All right, any additional comments? Okay, so I think that we're behind schedule here, and I think that we've done the work that we need to do here on this issue tonight to hand it back to you guys on the zoning subcommittee. So unless anybody on the board has anything further on this article, I'm gonna ask us to talk briefly about scheduling when we will continue this before we take a motion to continue the public hearing. And I'll turn to Ms. Brestrup, who has her hand up.
Next planning board meeting is March 20th. And that is after the list of warrant articles are due, but before the language is due. The language is due on March 26th, so March 20th would be a good date to continue.
Yeah, that's pretty much when we have to do it. Is there a time slot that we should be considering based on all other stuff that's already scheduled for that
I
evening?
don't think there are other things scheduled, but let me just check. So far, we have one thing scheduled for that night, and we haven't really given it a time slot, and it is Mr. Zomick would like to come and speak with you about safe and healthy neighborhoods. So normally we hold the public hearings first and then have appearances later. So 7:05 would be a reasonable time to continue this to.
Okay, I would entertain a motion to that effect. Mr. Crowner?
I move to continue the public hearing A 1313 to 7:05 on March 20th.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Further discussion? All in favor of continuing the public hearing? Opposed? Abstentions? That's a 7-0 vote. Thank you. So the planning board will consider this particular article again on March 20th at 7:05, and at that point, we will likely vote to make a recommendation to town meeting. Ms. Brestrup?
Was that a 7-0 vote, or was
1,
that
2, 3,
8-0?
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8-0. Chair is experiencing some mathematical counting difficulties. All right, turning to the next public hearing, A 1413, mixed-use district dimensions. Do I have to read the preamble again?
Read the preamble?
I did read it, yes.
For that one?
I said hearings, so. All right, so with the preamble remaining in effect, we will now turn our attention to A 1413, mixed-use center dimensions, to amend Article 6 and Table 3 dimensional regulations and associated footnotes to increase potential density and add flexibility to dimensional standards in the limited business, commercial, village center, and general business districts. Mr. Crowner, would you like to give us an overview of
Sure.
A 1413?
So the the arguments are the same, or in general the same for this article as for the previous one. As was noted, we should be thinking of these and presenting these as a package. They are actually intended to be a package. And in fact, the package is extended to the form-based design regulations, which we hope to finish before too long. So this article would be about changing Table 3, the dimensional regulations for a few districts, with the intention of allowing more development to take place on parcels in those districts. In this case, not necessarily residential use, but that would be the effect in the BL-COM district with the other article. The primary changes. So what we've done is broken the article into 4 sections. The first 3 sections are changes to particular zoning districts, the dimensional table for particular zoning districts, and the last one is changing language that is referred to in the dimensional table. So the first one is the BL and COM. We're talking about changing minimum lot area and additional lot area per family to be slightly smaller. Those apply for converted dwellings. That's really the only thing it's for. Converted dwellings in those zones could happen on smaller lots.
Sorry to interrupt. Why would it just be converted dwellings?
That's footnote B.
Existing, that's the existing.
It's existing, yes.
Thank you.
Changing the minimum lot frontage from 125 to 60, changing the minimum front setback from a minimum of 20 to a range of 10 at a minimum and 30 at a maximum. This goes along with the guidelines that we would like to adopt for form-based design. Creating a streetscape involves making sure that the buildings are closer to the street. Increasing the maximum number of floors by a half a floor, and then increasing the maximum height from 35 to a range of 16 at a minimum or 40 at a maximum. Second part, okay, and this also would add footnote B, add those zones to footnote B, BL and COM. So it would apply not just in BG, BVC, and BN districts, but also in BL and COM. And that's for basically the lot size and a few other things that apply. Second section would be change the dimensional table for business village center. Again, a minimum lot area, slightly smaller, lot frontage, slightly smaller, setback. Again, change it to a range of 10 at a minimum or 20 at a maximum. Change the side yard a little bit. Change the lot coverage, not the building coverage, but the lot coverage to be slightly more. Maximum floors slightly more, and change the height regulations to a range of 16 to 40. Finally, not finally, but the other zone is the general business zone. In this one, we're proposing to change the lot frontage from 100 to 40. That actually most buildings are non-conforming, not necessarily to that dimension, but a lot of the buildings in BG are not conforming in various parts of the dimensional table. Front setback, change it to a range 0 to 20. Side and rear yards. Actually, we didn't really talk about that, but I'm not sure what that's about. Maybe Mr. Tucker can tell us about that. In this case, maximum floors would increase by 1, a full floor from 4 to 5, and the maximum height from 50 to 55. So in each case, we're proposing, or actually in 2 cases, in the BL and COM district and in the BG district, we're proposing a maximum height that is 5 feet more than is currently allowed. And the last section would amend section 6.19, which describes how height is calculated, how the height of a building is calculated. Right now, it's just the highest point on the roof. And since we want to encourage, and in fact, many buildings already are pitched roof, when you measure the top of a pitched roof, you're actually cutting off a lot of the usable space. And so we're proposing to change where that is measured into the average, or basically to the middle of the roof for certain pitched roof buildings. And again, I will point out that the current language in the bylaw allows the height of a building to change under special permit by up to 10 feet. And that would not change, but it should be pointed out because we are talking about changing the heights of buildings in some of these zones, changing the maximum height in some of these zones. And so that there would be a possibility that they might be even higher under certain conditions. So, again, the zoning subcommittee did not make a formal vote, but we are pretty much done working on this one. We have the numbers where we like them, but we also would like to hear your input and public.
Okay. Before I turn to the rest of the board, just to confirm, my understanding was that we were intending to continue this hearing also, so we'll
Same
follow
deal, yep.
more or less the same procedure
Mhm.
with this one as we did with the last one. Okay, questions and comments from the board? Ms. Kruger.
This is really minor, but we did suggest that a graphic be added.
Oh, yes, thank
Um,
you. That's actually
for
not
the-
minor. That's important. So in addition to on 6.19, the last part, we've asked staff to put a diagram for each of the different kinds of roofs, so it's obvious what we're measuring. And they've agreed to do that, and that will be part of the article.
I have a couple of minor questions and technical points. One of the changes is to change the maximum floors from 3 to 3.5. And I'm wondering to what degree we can and should define what half a floor is. Our definitions actually don't even define a floor at all now, and I'm kind of wondering how that would come into play.
So this relates to form-based design regulations that talks about measuring floors. And since these are the form-based design regulations we're going to propose would apply in all of the mixed-use center districts, of which these are all part. So that's defined in there. And part of that definition states that when you have a floor that goes below the street level, that's where you might get a half a floor. So rather than have a floor that is below street level count as the first floor, and then you can only do 2 more, we're talking about allowing 3 more.
So to follow up on that, would that dimensional requirement of half a floor stand up if we did not have the form-based regulations that speak to that half below the street issue? Mr. Tucker?
We have actually had, and if you look at the table 3, we have had for years, half floors as the maximum. In the low-density and outlying residence district, it's 2.5 floors. In the office park district, I don't know why, it's also 2.5 floors. I think on a case-by-case basis, and actually the building commissioner is here, he could probably respond to this, you would do it on a case-by-case basis. Someone is proposing a building that has floors. Those floors have certain heights, and half of that height is half a floor.
Mr. Schreiber?
I also think that very commonly used is the case of a pitched roof building where you don't have a full floor under the gable. That's often considered to be a half floor.
Okay, and the one other point that I had was, we've already spoken a bit about the minimum maximum height issue, and I've expressed support for having minimum heights, because I think that encouraging vertical development in the centers is a good thing. I'm wondering whether it might be useful to have that concept applied to the floors as well, to specify minimum floors of 2, so that, because that's really the intent, is that you get something, I believe it's the intent, is that you get something on the second floor, that you have a second floor, rather than just a 16-foot tall, 1-story building. Mr. Tucker?
The 16 comes from the earlier attempt at form-based design regulations, and the assumption at that time in the discussion around it was that there might be single-story buildings in a mixed-use center. And what you wanted to do is to make sure that those single-story buildings were not so small that they were out of context with the rest of the setting. That said, if you wanted a minimum, and this has been suggested before, a minimum number of floors for a building in a mixed-use center, that's certainly done in other communities, and it could be done here.
So I guess I would suggest that that's at least worth consideration, especially since footnote A already sits on the whole floor line item, which means that it can be waived if necessary, if somebody wanted or needed to put in a single-story building. But I think my own sense is that having the default requirement be multiple stories is good in the centers. Mr. Crowder?
Can you elaborate? You're suggesting that in all of these zones that are proposed, or in particular zones?
So I'm just looking at the BL and COM, but I'm thinking more specifically about BVC and BG also. So yes, that would be all of them. More so the latter ones. I'm not quite so sure about BL and COM, but definitely to me, BVC and BG seem like the ones that would most benefit from that.
And do you have a minimum in mind?
I would suggest 2.
Okay. Yeah.
All right, other questions and comments from the board? Mr. Rosnoy.
Minor technical thing on the BG listing. You have maximum minimum height, but you're suggesting 55. Did you mean to have a range there? It's just one number. It has to be exactly 55? I suspect that's a typo, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. Yes, the minimum is a typo there.
I think the intention there was to change the name of that line to read maximum and minimum, because in the other districts, in some of the other districts, there is a maximum and minimum, even though there's not one in BG, which is where that particular bold-faced minimum appears.
Right, so do we want a range, or do we want to just have one height?
If you go back to the first section here, A1, on the back page, there's an amendment to footnote N, which is the footnote that applies to that particular dimension, floors, and there's a proposal to add the sentence where a single figure is shown, it represents the maximum height.
Good, thanks.
Okay. Seeing no other questions or comments, I will turn to the public. If anybody has feedback on this article. Ms. Keller.
Janet Keller, Precinct 1. So, as Ms. Perot indicated, we weren't really expecting NABC to come back with a vengeance, but here we are. So I guess we were maybe naive. These changes, as I indicated earlier, would significantly increase residential density in the commercial and limited business and BVC districts throughout town. And you put the commercial together with the BVC and you got NABC. It will extend, well, everybody knows what the outline of that place is on the map. We're talking here very dramatic changes that we still feel, and so I have to say it again, are not in keeping with our neighborhood, and we are which is predominantly, and it's not my analysis, it was the Cecil analysis, low-density residential, agricultural, historic. I know there are a lot of apartments to the south of us, a few near the Mill River, but we've got a lot of farmland, and RN, we're surrounded by RN, and we're very concerned about intense development bordering the floodplains and wetlands of Eastman Brook and Mill River. We still have the concerns, as you heard, about the serious pervasive disturbances in our neighborhood and throughout the town from the unruly students. They haven't been solved yet. We're working really hard on that, but they're not solved yet. And we're often asked, if not North Amherst, then where? And we could get very enthusiastic about Mass Ave, University Drive, and perhaps some other areas that are more suitable and do not threaten residential neighborhoods. I was really struck when we were in the Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods group about how the tenants are protected for the quiet enjoyment of their apartments, and so they should be. And that is equally true. Perhaps more true. I don't know, maybe not more true. Everyone should have the quiet enjoyment of where they live. And I hope you hear that we have real concerns about that and don't see the protections in place yet to protect us. We also, I think I won't go with, I'll go with my last point, which is that this is a package. It's a complicated package to, I would request that you do a couple of scenarios for us, do a little scenario analysis and build out analysis, run some numbers and show us what the changes could really result in, please. And finally, I would ask that you put the package together in a way that it's very clear that the degree and the extent of the rezoning involved here and which areas will be affected. Make that very clear to people, if you will, please. That was not clear when this first arose, and we've had to scramble, and I feel a little uncomfortable here because I haven't been able to devote the time because I didn't have enough lead time to really start honing in on this. So I think that's really important. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Keller. Just following up on that last point Ms. Keller made, and because Mr. Crowner, you also already spoke about these as intended to be a package of the changes going together, I guess I would suggest that we structure our planning board report to town meeting in a way that emphasizes that and makes it clear that we're not talking about separate unrelated things, but that does speak to the impact of all of these together.
Good idea.
Thank you, Ms. Keller. Ms. Jones.
Hi, Cinda Jones, Coles, North Amherst. These zoning changes are critical. Amherst zoning is way behind the times. I think the 70s is the last time meaningful changes were made and the last time meaningful housing was built, and this town has demand that's unmet, and it's going in inappropriate places unless we allow density in village centers where it belongs. I like Janet's idea of doing case studies. We have one. I'll forward it to the board tomorrow, but John Kuhn looked at our site that we want to build the new trolley barn, and it's a 4,000 square foot footprint that would have two 2,000 square foot commercial spaces on the first floor. Maybe a restaurant on one side, maybe a retail on the other. It's a 3-story building allowed by right. We couldn't get much larger building if you change the zoning. So the same 3 stories would be allowed. We could have a full ceiling instead of dormers, which are expensive. We're only allowed 4 units in this building today. So we have 4 residential units above 2 commercial units. Each of the residential units has to be 2,000 square feet in size. And that's 4-bedroom units or 3-bedroom units, larger than the Cape House of Mrs. Holden's next door. And just like Meadow Street has these giant courtyards that can't be managed, where people gather and have huge parties, I don't want to have a 4-bedroom apartment the size of a bowling alley. It's just not manageable. And you're gonna have girlfriends staying overnight. And if you allow more units, you're actually, in Mr. Kuhn's review, allowing fewer bedrooms. If we had 4 units allowed today, we'd have 4 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, which for a total of 14. If you allowed us 8 units instead of the 4 units, we'd have 1 and 2 bedroom units, much more controllable tenants, and we would have 12 beds instead of 14. So I urge you to make meaningful change in the zoning and put density in village centers where it belongs. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Other comments or feedback? Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Scott Artizone. I am a resident of Henry Street in Amherst. I did not anticipate speaking. I came here late. I wanted to hear the initial proposition that was brought forth, but oh well, bedtime called. I had to put my kids to bed and then run out. So I'm a young father. I'm also a real estate professional in town. Fairly new to the business, about 3 years now, and I work with a lot of young families. Pardon me. One of them right there calling me because that's just the nature of the business. So first-time home buyers, people of that nature, and people who are also moving to the area for the lifestyle that they can have here. I'm a transplant myself. I moved here about 7 years ago. My wife is faculty at the university. We're very happy with our situation, how we landed here. We love the community. But I have to say that it's been an interesting, eye-opening experience for the first time entrance once the romance veil has been lifted, shall we say, and you get to really know a town and gown sort of community. What you get to learn is rather fascinating. What struck me as I was sitting there was the idea that when I was in college, I was studying on a course, and they would talk about pollution, and they say the solution to pollution is dilution, right? And sitting here thinking about it, it's a horrible analogy, because what I'm going to say is the necessary ingredient that will be equated to pollution is the students. But to dilute them, as is currently the case, is really devastating to many neighborhoods. You know, the reality is we have a university that is not providing housing to their students. We have an artificially inflated property value as a result of that, which is limiting young families to move into the area to fill our school systems. It's driving up our taxes, and it is creating a system that is, in my opinion, and it's just my opinion, pretty unsustainable. If we were able to concentrate populations that need greater controls and have better oversight over said populations, I feel like our communities would improve. I think it's a management issue. I don't think that it falls to anything else. We've all seen what poor management does. We all know it. So as I'm sitting here listening to this, and I'm listening to these ideas that are being proffered, a lot of them make sense to me, you know? A lot of them do. I could understand the resistance. When I found out about the proposed project that's a by-right development that's right down the street from where I live, I was not happy, but I understood it. Because in a market of inefficiencies, someone's going to find out where they can move and how they can do it, and they're going to use it. And that's what happened. And I put the direct response to that on the fact that a more cohesive development was not allowed. That's what I'm going to leave it at. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Seeing no further comment, I am going to recommend that we wrap up our discussion of this. We're also heading toward a continuation of this public hearing, likely to the same date of March 20th. And so I guess I would recommend that we would consider it at 7:30, just to put an arbitrary time on it. Any further discussion before we move there? Okay, so would someone like to make a motion? Mr. Crowner.
I move that we continue the public hearing for public hearing A 1413 to 7:30 on March 20th.
A second.
Further discussion? All in favor of continuing the public hearing? Opposed? Abstentions? That's an 8-0 vote in favor of continuation to March 20th, 7:30 PM. All right, thank you. Last and not least on our lineup of public hearings this evening, we have A 1513, non-conforming structures, to amend sections 9.20 and 9.22 of the zoning bylaw to, 1, define a structural alteration, 2, allow the zoning enforcement officer to grant selected changes to dimensionally non-conforming buildings in mixed-use center districts, 3, relieve conforming changes occurring within a non-conforming building to proceed without an additional special permit, and 4, to allow the board granting the permit for the principal use to also grant any special permit needed for a change in the nonconformity. Before we proceed to the public hearing, I'll ask if there are any conflicts on the board. Seeing none, I will ask Mr. Crowner to guide us through the wonderful world of dimensionally non-conforming.
Well, as you recall, the planning board took this away from the zoning subcommittee. Planning board is directing this one itself, so I would defer to staff, hopefully.
Ms. Brestrup has her hand bravely raised
I'm
into the
going
air.
to take a stab at explaining it, but I wanted to let you know that the building commissioner has joined us this evening at the request of staff because we thought he might be able to provide a further explanation about why this is needed and perhaps some examples of cases where this type of zoning amendment would help.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. We're glad to have you with us this evening. And it's quite useful to have him here because this article is primarily about situations where the building commissioner, as our zoning enforcement officer, already has the authority today in the bylaw to permit certain alterations and repairs to buildings that are and properties that are non-conforming in various ways. And what we're proposing here would be to slightly expand the range of situations where he's allowed to do that in the case of residential buildings, as well as extending that into commercial or non-residential buildings in the center business districts. So, Mr. Moore, if you'd like, I'd ask you to come forward and maybe give us some examples of the types of situations where these new regulations would apply.
Sure. Good evening, Rob Moore, Building Commissioner. These changes propose to accomplish a few things. One is to eliminate the potential for applicants to have to visit both the Planning Board and the Zoning Board of Appeals when making alterations, interior alterations only to non-conforming buildings. It also will provide for a change of use to a new as-of-right use in a non-conforming building when only interior alterations are taking place. Finally, it reduces the length of the permit process for those instances where only interior alterations are taking place, which we see is pretty important when we're seeing, as an example, restaurants or storefronts change over rapidly in short periods of time. This would be beneficial, and again, we're talking about interior-only renovations. So as far as a couple of examples, this board saw recently an application for a restaurant across the street, Oriental Flavor. This would be one example where there's a nonconformity, might be relative to height, lot coverage of that property, And those interior alterations, although this one's a little different because it did include some exterior alteration, but that's a case where because of the nonconformity, it really should have been in front of the zoning board for a special permit in addition to the site plan review. Other examples, we recently permitted interior alteration work to the Silverscape building for the new medical office that's moving in there. And as of right use, no exterior changes other than signage, no new provisions of the bylaw being enacted or applicable as of due to the use change. And again, that's one, as a non-conforming building due to side yard setback, would have been subject to, should have been subject to special permit with the zoning board. I can go on, but the restaurants that come in and out of the town center area where I'm granting site plan review waivers because the only exterior work would be signage. Again, they most often will have some nonconformity due to height or lot coverage.
And my understanding is that that is essentially the entirety of the downtown business district, or at least the majority of it is buildings that are non-conforming for one reason or another.
Seems like everyone that does pop up falls into that category. I'm not sure what the percentage are.
Okay, thank you. Questions or comments from the board for Mr. Mora or for anyone else? Mr. Crowner.
People will want to know what's the danger in this? What are we opening up?
Mm-hmm.
It's not clear to me if there is any danger, but we need to explore that.
Sure. So I guess I've thought about that a little bit also, and I'm not seeing any. We might hear from people that there is, but I think it's carefully written such that, in particular, changes in use that require a permit in and of themselves would still require that permit. So if you needed site plan review for the underlying use, you would still have to get it. You just wouldn't have to get an additional special permit just because your building was built before the existing zoning and encroaches on a setback or something like that. So that's my understanding of the situation, and I don't find that to be dangerous personally. So, Mr. Tucker.
I'd just like to speak very briefly to the question of trying to avoid circumstances where an applicant might have to end up in front of two different boards in order to get one zoning permit for the use in dealing with the nonconformity. This board has, over the years, including before any of you were on it, had a long practice of trying to make amendments to the zoning bylaw specifically to prevent that. And I can, if you're interested or town meeting is interested, we can produce a long list of the amendments that were made so that whoever was issuing the permit for the use would also be dealing with whatever special permit modification or issue came up as a secondary or accessory issue, so that you only, as an applicant, would have to go through and deal with one board. Some of you may have had the experience already of doing permit processes where you had both a site plan review hearing and a special permit hearing simultaneously. And those are the result of those amendments, several of them over the years. So that, I just wanted to point out, we try to avoid applicant ping pong whenever we can. It's not useful, it slows everything down, it costs everybody money, and it doesn't add anything to the review of what's being proposed.
Right. My opinion is that it makes the process not only easier for the applicant, but better public process generally if you're going to have one public hearing when all those, or two public hearings combined into one where all the issues are discussed. People, if they want to speak to the matter, and can come to one hearing and don't have to come to two different hearings. You don't have to have two different boards that need to understand every detail of the application. So we have dealt with quite a few of those as part of site plan review applications, and I think it's a lot more efficient that way. All right, other questions or comments? All right, seeing none, comment from the public? All right, that was relatively straightforward. Thank you, Mr. Mora, for that overview. Okay, so seeing no comments from the public, I would entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
I
Ms.
move
Cooper?
that we close the public hearing for non-conforming structures.
Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion on closing the public hearing? Seeing none, all in favor of closing the public hearing? Opposed, abstentions? That's an 8-0 vote in favor of closing the public hearing. We'll move on to board discussion. So we are looking to make a recommendation to town meeting on this article tonight. So unless there's further discussion, I would entertain a motion as to what the board's recommendation should be. Mr. Crowner.
I move that the planning board recommend to town meeting that it adopt the article entitled non-conforming structures.
Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor of recommending adoption? Opposed? Abstentions? That's an 8-0 vote in favor of recommendation. Thank you, that was quick and easy. All right, that wraps up our public hearing section of the evening, but it does not wrap up our zoning section of the evening. Next item on our agenda is zoning subcommittee report. Mr. Crowner.
So in addition to the articles that we've discussed tonight, we're also making progress on the form-based design regulations, which we intend as part of the package. The language is not ready yet, and we're hopeful that it will be ready before the language is due, but it's going to be tight. There's a lot of pages to go through. What we've done so far is we've taken out the street types. We've taken out the chart of building types and replaced it with text that says, this is what the building type is, rather than the chart that said building type and then described it and then said where it was. It's a lot easier to understand this way. We're having some difficulty figuring out how to incorporate the open space type form. That was one of the chapters in there. There's a recognition that open space design is important, but we're not sure how to require it or how to build it into the bylaw yet. It worked differently when we were speaking about, or when we were trying to apply to a specific area, and there was particularly in both of the areas that it would have applied to, there were large property owners that could have a significant impact on the design of open space. We're now talking about applying form-based design regulations to mixed-use centers all over town, and so it's more difficult to imagine how that part of the bylaw would work in those areas. So we're struggling with that, and there are other sections that were in the original bylaw proposal that we have not yet decided how to proceed on. But we are working on that, and I don't know if that's available. If you guys have had that, seen the language in your packets or on the web or something, you do have that. So definitely welcome feedback. I mean, it's interesting but it's also a lot of work. Recently, there's been 2 other proposals that have come forward from staff and other and the Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods Working Group about potential amendments for this spring that the zoning subcommittee is somewhat mixed on. So we want to hear from you. They're both things that we're interested in, but it's adding stuff, kind of late. Fortunately, they're relatively simple, at least on paper. One is a residential parking minimum that so right now in the bylaw, there's a residential parking maximum. Right now in the bylaw, there's a minimum number of parking spaces required for each residential unit. The proposal is to put a maximum on rental units. And the maximum might be something like 1.5 parking spaces per tenant. So since we know that there are only 4 people in a single-family home, that would mean a parking lot of no bigger than 6 spaces. Or smaller for, if the house is smaller or whatever, and there would be fewer tenants. It would also apply, of course, to apartment buildings and so on. So it's a very simple fix, but it would apply all over town. In general, the zoning subcommittee favored going forward with this. It's been requested by the Safety and Health and Neighborhoods Working Group, and so we're inclined to try and fit it in. But of course, we'd like to hear from you. The next one is trying to do something to encourage private student housing development. It's an issue that has come up over and over again, but where can we do that? Well, there is a zone currently now that has provision for student housing. That's the RF district. It was designed for fraternities and sororities, but it could be used for social dormitory type buildings that would house a number of students. And lo and behold, I wasn't aware of this. I'm not sure how many other people were aware of this, but there is an RF zone on campus. So it seems like a natural fit to allow a more significant residential use right on campus. It's the Newman Center and the 2 properties north of the Newman Center, in case anyone doesn't know that. The other part of the RF zone is on Olympia Drive. So the idea is, how can we allow a more intense development in either or both of those areas? And the initial thought is perhaps just add footnote A to various parts of the dimensional table that allow those dimensions to be changed by special permit. The zoning subcommittee was more mixed on this one. It's a little more complicated. It's not something that we've thought about before. We think it's worth pursuing, but whether we pursue it now in this limited form and then bring something else back later that is more detailed, or whether we go forward with it now on the chance that something might happen soon and would be able to take advantage of this. We're not sure whether we should add another thing to the plate. So again, we'd like to hear feedback. And I guess the final thing is, I'm going to make another pitch for people to think about how they can help get the word out at the public meetings that happen in the last few weeks before town meeting. The warrant review, the bus tour, precinct meetings, and then again at town meeting itself, start thinking about who wants to present which article. Start thinking about it now so that we're ready for it when the time for decision making comes.
Thank you, Mr. Crowner. Okay, feedback from the board then on the 2 issues that Mr. Crowner mentioned, which is the residential parking maximum and potential changes to the RF district. I will lead off by asking about the parking, which I think is a terrific idea, putting a maximum on parking. That, we've kind of skated around that issue for many, or at least several years now, trying to find ways of dealing with that. And so I think that conceptually is a good idea. I'm wondering, as always, about doing it in zoning versus doing it as a general bylaw versus including it in the regulations that the Safe and Healthy Neighborhood Working Group is working on. Doing it in zoning, to me, seems like the least effective way, at least in the short term, of getting any valuable use out of it, because it only applies to new construction or new permits that come before us and would grandfather all the existing spaces. So just wondering about the efficacy of that. Mr. Tucker?
I think Mr. Zomack can talk some more about that at your next meeting, but generally speaking, general bylaws, town bylaws, are really not supposed to take the place of regulating land use in the way that zoning does. Zoning is supposed to regulate land use. General bylaws more frequently address behavior or activities, business activities, things impacting public spaces and so forth. So the current drafts of the rental regulations addressing parking principally refer to the zoning. And I would say that this is not something that the full Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods Working Group has requested of the Planning Board. This is something that staff, working on the draft as we are approaching the deadlines here, are asking that you put in as a placeholder in the event that as we go forward with the rental regulations, it becomes necessary to do it, so that we could have it on the list. We've got, if you have seen the meeting and public hearing schedule, we have the list of warrant articles due on March 11th, which is next Monday. The warrant article language due on the 26th. There's a timeline we're running up against here, so we want to be able to get a placeholder in. We can take it out before the warrant gets signed if it turns out that this is not something that makes sense, but we can't go forward with it unless it's on the list, so to speak.
Ms. Kruger?
I have a question, and maybe I'm just not getting it. I already made one interpretive error on this earlier, but when we tie the number of parking places to the tenant rather than to the unit, and I think it gets to your point about general bylaw or regulation versus zoning and land use. I have 2 tenants. I come before the board. I am limited to 3. Next year, I have 4 tenants. Do I have to come back and have my permit modified? So I think it's just problematic to tie it to the number of tenants instead of units, and that's where I think it doesn't fit, at least in its current form, with a land use regulation.
Thank you. Mr. Schreiber, did you have a comment?
Mr. Chair, I have a comment on that. To me, the logic would be it's tied to the number of bedrooms, that the number of parking spaces is tied to the number of bedrooms. That is the legal, and that's the legal occupancy for the building. So if it's a 3-bedroom unit, whatever the factor is, it's times 3. So, and that I think would help, because we have a problem in town, and our problem is, multiple cars parked all over. And so possibly tying it, to the number of bedrooms is, whether 1.5 is the right number or not, I'm not sure, but number of bedrooms to me, legal bedrooms.
An important distinction.
You only get 0.9 if it's an illegal bedroom.
That's right, yeah.
Mr. Schreiber?
Not counting the ones in the basement and the attic.
But even that, I mean, we can poke holes in all the various ways, because a legal bedroom, let's pretend that I'm a functional family, I could have plenty of people in each of those bedrooms that are all related to each other.
Yeah.
And where do we stop? So in other words, yeah. So I'm not sure, because
Well, I would think that you have to, somewhere you have to stop, because you just have, if you're a functional family and you have, bedrooms and they're filled with children, there's they're not driving cars, but the idea is the reason we're doing this is not to inhibit the single-family owner-occupied house. It is, it's addressing, coming out of the Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods Committee, which I missed the last meeting or so, but it's, it's dealing with rental properties more or less, and so.
Mr. Tucker?
I would also point out that it's not establishing a requirement. It's not saying you have to have this many spaces. It's saying just as there's a minimum number of spaces you have to provide, based on whatever the factor is that you're using to determine that, there's a maximum as well. So part of the intent here is to, and this has been discussed with the working group, is that there's a desire not to have excess parking created for new rental properties or for conversions to rental properties. There have been in some neighborhoods what are essentially illegal parking lots created, and those we'll get to those. Or rather, Mr. Morrow will get to those. John Thompson will get to those. But we don't want to encourage the creation of extra parking on an individual property so that they can rent it to the person next door necessarily.
Right.
One of the impacts that the working group has talked about is when you have rental properties, one of the impacts of parking is not just is it unsightly on the front lawn, but it's an increase in traffic. And there are public health and safety questions. Can you get into the property if you're an emergency medical technician because it's all clogged up with 12 cars or something? So it's a way of sort of managing one of the impacts of rental properties, where you do have more cars, generally speaking, than you do with homeowner-occupied properties.
Mr. Schreiber?
But this applies to all dwelling units, not just rentals. So in other words, and including single-family houses.
No, as drafted, the maximum would apply to rental properties.
Doesn't
say that.
And for residential uses, including rental units, so that would be all residential units plus rental, including
But it says 2 parking spaces for each dwelling unit and 4 residential uses, including rental units, a maximum of.
So a single-family owner-occupied house would be a residential use.
I think how Mr. Tucker is reading that is for residential units that include rental units
Yeah.
or something more.
Oh, I see, then
along
I would
those
just
lines.
say for rental residential units. For residential units subject to rental permitting, or something like that.
So I think the question before us at the moment is not so much the details of how this would work as much as the question of whether we're going to include it on the warrant, or on the list of articles that are submitted for consideration for the warrant, which is a decision that needs to be made tonight. My own sense is that the last thing that I would want to do is cause friction with the working group and screw up their plans for dealing with parking, because they've been considering this a lot more closely than we have. So I would argue in favor of us putting it on the list, but I do think a lot of work needs to be done too, so I think we should be careful with it and be willing to take it off the list if necessary, but at least for the time being, I'm okay with going forward with it. I see nodding heads. Yes, is the answer there. Comments on the other issue having to do with private student housing development in the RF district. I'll offer I think that we all, and particularly you all, and town meeting all, has a lot on its plate having to do with zoning this spring, and this is pretty late in the game to be talking about something brand new in my mind. So I guess I would not look to that as a spring type thing.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. Yeah. There's just that. The first thing I want to do is see a map of where the RF districts are. There's just so many questions around this.
If you wanted to look at that, we can provide all of that.
Isn't that in the
Right, but it is, it's kind of the, two meetings ago, we talked about all the articles, but what the sum total, the effect that it would be on town meeting, and it feels like a tipping point with this one. It feels like too much.
Mr. Rosnoy.
I guess I'd have a question. Are these parcels on university property? Is that what you said, Bob? I mean, aren't we dealing with the issue of state sovereignty and the universities?
These are all private properties.
Ah,
But they're
okay.
enclosed by the university.
I see. I thought
So the
I
Vatican
misunderstood
City.
that.
Vatican City. I like the city without the smoke.
The properties on campus, if I may, the properties on campus are all private. The Olympia Drive area is predominantly owned by the university, but there are 2 properties there that are privately owned
That fit this
that
zoning.
could be impacted by this.
While I'm speaking, maybe related to this, what's the status of the housing inventory study and report?
We're going to get to that.
Would table that until later in the evening.
Okay, it sort of relates to zoning subcommittee issues, I thought. Yeah,
Would you like
it's,
to address that,
part
Ms.
of-
Ms.
part of the
Kruger?
safe and healthy
Mr.
neighborhood?
Skip out of
Luckily
order.
for me, Mr. Crowner was there last night when the consultants did their final report for the housing production plan. So I assume we were going to do it during committee reports, but if it's more germane now, I would defer to the zoning subcommittee chair.
I'd be in favor of folding this into our zoning.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Mr. Crowner, if you'd like to proceed.
So I went to the presentation by the consultant of the first part of the housing study, I guess. It was very good. They explained what the state of our housing stock is right now and offered a plan or the outline of a plan to improve the stock of affordable housing. And I would recommend people look up the report on the web and the PowerPoint that accompanied it. There were some very interesting graphs on there that showed the impact of increasing population like this and almost a steady line of housing stock, not changing. So that graph and then the news recently of people who would be considered low-income, affordable housing stock basically being kicked out of their homes. These are the issues that are informing the zoning subcommittees and the planning board's work on finding some way to allow more housing to take place. The issue is that affordability relates to people's ability to afford to live in Amherst. It's not just about low-income people. It's about being able to live in Amherst. And the analysis by the consultants was that it's becoming increasingly difficult for people who are not university professors or some other highly paid profession. So we need to find a way to ease the pressure on our housing stock that the university's increasing enrollment is causing. And the effect that it's having is that it's driving out people in from low to moderate to middle income people. And that has a ripple effect on the schools, on the budget, on everything. And that's why we're doing this. We're not doing it so that we can cram more students in somewhere. We're doing it so that we have the capacity to house the people who want to live in Amherst and who are finding it more difficult to live in Amherst, including the people on Lincoln Avenue and that neighborhood and all the other neighborhoods who are finding it difficult to live in their homes. We don't want to lose those people. We want them to stay where they are. And the problem is they are being pushed out by these other forces, and it's a problem. It's also a very big problem that the housing authority, for example, has some number of 400 or something vouchers that they're able to distribute for Section 8 vouchers. There's only 200 or so that are being used because people just cannot find a place to use the vouchers in Amherst, even though we're able to provide more than we have. So there's a lot of issues that people don't really realize. I didn't realize. I mean, I think a lot of people have a sense that there are these issues out there. The report is opened my eyes, and I strongly recommend that you look it up. And I hope actually that we can get a presentation or something or at a planning board meeting, because it would help.
Mr. Chair, might I request that, the report is finished, yes?
I think they were taking final feedback, and they were going to finish. They were going to finish in the near future.
Okay. Might I request that we certainly get a copy of it, at least as planning board members? I think it's important to us. Granted, it's online, but something that we should have.
Mr. Tucker.
As part of the rest of the context for this, staff are in conversation with the consultants who have been hired to do the housing market study. That's the study of market rate housing needs. And part of that is going to be a study of the impacts of student housing on the housing market overall in Amherst. So we are closing in on having all of this information as a context for the kinds of zoning changes that you have been talking about for years.
Thank you. Okay, circling back to private student housing, RF, which is where we started, is anyone looking to try to convince us to go forward with that this spring? Seeing none, I think we can take that off the table then. Okay, Rob, did you have anything else from ZSC?
Nope.
Thank you very much for all of those details and all of your subcommittee's work. All right, next on the agenda, we have I'm sorry, Ms. Brestrom.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to suggest when you're finished with zoning, if you could speak with Mr. Laverdiere, who has been waiting here, and he has an A&R plan that he wants to talk to you about.
Sure, I think we are wrapping up the zoning section, so we will get to that shortly. Next up, we have a letter from Cinda Jones regarding natural resource conservation zoning, which I think we have in our packets. Please take a look at that. If you haven't seen it, it has some interesting ideas on preserving open space and natural resources. And finally, public comment on zoning. We've still got people patiently waiting. Did you have additional thoughts for us on zoning in general, not so restricted to the specific articles as I was being before? Ms. Keller.
Thank you, Janet Keller. Back to the form-based, two comments and a question. On the administration, it would be the 16.91, I think, is the section. The subcommittee talked about that earlier, and it was noted that there were concerns about it. I would like to underline that we fully recognize that there has to be relief in any regulation, but it shouldn't be so big we could drive a truck through it. So it shouldn't really say, it really needs to be bounded. So that'll be something we'll be looking for. And on open space, the committee also discussed that and wasn't that sure about how to proceed with that, but I just want to underline for you all the importance of being able to do something with that. I think that'll be very important if people are to be able to get on board with this. So that's, I see people nodding, point made. And then finally, I had a question regarding the relationship of the form-based overlay zoning to other sections within the zoning regulation, like 3.201, the design board. This just occurred to me, and you have far more expertise than I do. And 10.38 and 11.242, the design specifications for in the site special permit and site plan review. What would be the, if any, the implications of adopting form-based on those sections?
Mr. Tucker, did you?
There's no proposal at this time to alter the role of the Design Review Board, which has jurisdiction in the downtown and over town projects. It does not yet have, although it might make perfectly good sense for it to have, jurisdiction as an advisory body in the other mixed-use centers. In terms of 10.38 and 11.24, those are the sections that the two permit granting bodies use, and they include consideration of design issues as described in those sections. There's no conflict there. All that says is that when you're looking at a permit, the body has to consider design issues, and what we're doing is we're adding in the form-based design regulations a whole new set of criteria for the board to consider under that criteria. So I think that's basically it.
So you were saying they would coexist within the
Absolutely.
existing framework that the zoning board and the planning board apply when they're considering special permit and site plan reviews?
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. Anything else? Ms. Pro?
Melissa Perot, Precinct 1. It is too bad that we haven't got the market housing survey on which to build these rezoning proposals. It seems strange that we put the cart before the horse in that respect. That housing survey was funded, I think, over a year ago, and we still don't have it. And yet you're moving ahead with zoning. And I seem to remember at the last town meeting, even the town manager saying there would be no rezoning in North Amherst until the market housing study was there for us to look at. So I'm really disappointed in going forward with rezoning in, well, actually not just in North Amherst, but over all of these 6 zones throughout the town. I do think we need to put things in the right order. And I'd also like to know what the board thinks is a healthy balance between rental housing and home ownership in any given area or village center. We have over 80% residential rentals, the majority of which are short-term. Is this healthy? What can the board do to bring a balance back to the area, which is being undermined by this situation? Continuing to put in more dense residential units seems to be the absolute opposite of what the area needs. We need to develop the historic district. We need to get live-work units going. We need to have something to support the farming industry that is all around us, with some processing plants, some markets for food. But all the emphasis here, all the emphasis is on providing more residential units. I find it very disappointing. You're all good people, and you all seem to fundamentally support the master plan. I do not see how this supports the purpose, which is stated at the beginning of the form-based design, whatever it is, development standards. What is it in this form-based design that's supporting economic stability in the area? What is looking to the future stability of the area and the future of the town? All we're doing is doing the same as we've done before, which is providing more residences. And this does not support this town well. And everybody has said that. It's in all the reports. We need to broaden the base. I'm bewildered. I truly am bewildered, not only by this document, which I find impossible to work my way through with all the re-referencing that you have to do in order to make sense of it. And I long for some simplicity. I know it's a complicated matter, but this is too much to be throwing at people, really. And you don't have the market house surveys to base it on. You don't tell me why we have to have more residences when 80%, over 80%, is already rental residents, short term, which has unbalanced the situation in our neighborhood. Please give me answers to this before you go ahead and make things worse.
Thank you, Ms. Pro.
nuances?
It's a complicated topic that we've been trying to answer through all of our work here on this board. There's no
Unravel.
simple
It seems to
answers
end
to any
up
of these issues.
being something that's working against what the community actually wants to cooperate, that has ideas, wants to forward this community into the future for the town. Because if these little inns at Atkins and North Amherst get a life of their own, it's going to benefit you all, and in the middle of town. And we're not getting that kind of help. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Perot. All right. Next up on our agenda, we turn to old business. We have signing of decision. I'm sorry, Ms. Brestrup, you had tried to get me to consider things out of order for Mr. Laverdiere. Why don't we go ahead with that? Yes, Ms. Brestrup.
Mr. Laverdiere is here to talk to you about an A&R plan that he has submitted, and he, I believe, wants to explain a little about the plan. He has also submitted a site plan review application for a building down on West Street at the corner of, well, near the corner of Pomeroy Lane and West Street in the Pomeroy Village Center. And you will be seeing that proposal for site plan review shortly, but this A&R plan affects what he's going to propose with his building. So maybe he can describe to you a little about this, and then I'll fill in the gaps.
Sorry, before you start, can we consider this something that was not reasonably anticipated 48 hours in advance? I'm trying to fit it into the agenda here.
I think this is part of the explanation of his A&R plan. Ordinarily, I would explain the A&R plan to you, and then you would probably choose to sign it. In this case, I think Mr. Laverdiere might be planning to withdraw the application, but he wants a moment to describe to you what he's proposed
that's
and
fine.
why he's withdrawing it.
Yep. That's great. Go ahead, Mr. Laverdiere, and thank you for your patience.
We are going to withdraw the A&R.
Okay.
And it's sort of a complicated reason. It goes back some ways. It goes back to a fellow by the name of John Murphy, who was the town attorney in 1978. And at that time, Mr. Murphy did an analysis of the business village center where you don't need frontage according to our zoning. And he analyzed that against the state law that says you need 20 feet of zoning, of frontage to sell a lot. But he determined that by having meets and bounds and rights of way would allow a lot to exist, even though it's existing through these rights of ways. And the present town attorney is looking into that. And he's trying to find, looking back in the case law to see if a piece of land that we actually did sell down in South Amherst is conforming under this meets and bounds and rights of ways. And we had anticipated doing this building that I'm proposing in the same way. Now, there are other options possibly, depending on how he views that. And so what I wanted to do was just sort of give you an idea of why this has sort of become an issue, and comes right into zoning. So I was going to just give you a look at the, of sort of just an early view of what we're kind of, planning. It's, obviously just something in progress. So it's not a final plan, but it certainly will give you a look at what we're planning, and I can describe the. I have one question here. This comes. Carol Vincey's working with me on fulfilling
So I'm gonna
And
just.
I know, I went through Bill, and you've never even seen this.
No, and we are no I mean, why he still uses Ford Gillen Architects on his
okay.
letterhead, because
So you're-
legally, we are no longer Ford Gillen, so
Okay.
that's a.
Good, I was just gonna ask you, if you
Yeah.
know, if you could,
There's-
this wouldn't be a conflict of interest.
It's not a conflict,
Okay.
except that I feel that it's a conflict on paper, but I'll make sure he changes that, yeah.
Okay, so anyway, yeah, by the time we actually do present, probably should get that off. Anyway, what we have is a site that slopes toward the road on 116 in South Amherst, and then there's a wetland, and then the road on 116, and it's down just, it's the 417 property just north of the Amherst Office Park, where where the old ham house, the old brick ham house we renovated some years back. And anyway, what happens is, the way the zoning is written is that the side that faces your frontage can only be 40 feet, yet any of the other sides can be 50 feet. That's that extra 10 feet you're allowed to do. And it does make a lot of sense the way it's written, because, the idea that you can be only 10 feet from the road, the 40-foot structure is a lot less imposing than maybe a 50-foot structure. And then pieces, land behind it could have been 50 feet, or buildings behind the ones right on the road could be 50 feet, and it would make a nice form of development. Well, in this case, just the way the land sloped, even though this building was maybe 180 feet from the road, when the land sloped away, that side of the building went up to 50 feet, and the other, or 49 feet, the other three sides were 39 feet. So what that meant was that if we created a lot between the road and this building, then there would be no frontage. And the building then, that side of the building, which had the slope, could be the 50-foot side. So we started that process, and that's where we ran into. Then the building had no frontage, and we're trying to find out if, the Mass General Law and how that pertains to this type of use. And of course, being as we'd already had a town attorney, John Murphy, rule on this in '78, we were under the impression that we could just draw these meets and bounds with a right-of-way, and that would allow the entrance and the safe entrance of both fire trucks, emergency vehicles, all that, and that would meet the zoning. But the new town attorney's not quite sure. So that's the reason it's being withdrawn. And until we get that answer, he was working on it, in the last couple of days. He's got all the information from the old attorney. And so we're moving forward, and I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of what we're proposing. And interestingly enough, with the new zoning, this building would work because, we're now measuring the roof in a different spot because we want to keep the peak roof, we want to keep that New England style. But we're also kind of, as a businessman who's I'm trying to get this building going in the summer and then having it ready for next summer so that we can begin to rent it out. Amherst is, no matter what, a town that changes in the summer. I mean, whether it's the 10,000 feet of business on the first floor or the 12 apartments that are planned for the second and third floor. So that's kind of where we are. And so I just wanted to give you a little update on what's going on in from a legal perspective. And I hope I got it as close as I could in Mass General Law and whether, how that's going to play out. There are other opportunities here that we might be able to, create a private road rather than an easement, and but that's a whole nother process of going through, what would it be, a subdivision control law versus an easement, which is, just basically much easier and simpler. So that's kind of what's gone on, and I just wanted you to see what we're working on. And I'm hoping all these questions can be answered in the next 2 weeks or month, and we will then get to, meet with you and move forward.
Thank you for the explanation, and thank you for your patience in
Can
waiting
I
for
ask a
us.
quick question?
Sure can.
What is this building, Ron, you didn't describe, like, is it an apartment house, mixed use, commercial?
Mixed-use building. One of the things, you know, if you look at the top page there is, the way the land sloped, you know, when I was designing it, I wanted to put 6 underground parking spaces into the garage, or garages, and just see how the market reacts to those. I mean, there's 12 units. I mean, are people willing to spend $100 to house their car, really? I mean, because by the time I'm done building all those, you know, I'm gonna need to earn that capital to you know, to make those pay for all the effort, the concrete, you know, the whole system of putting garages underneath. And I just, you know, it's kind of an interesting concept. I know if we were in Boston, there'd be no doubt. But is Amherst ready for that? It was one of the ideas that, you know, I wanted to find out, because I think it's a really good service to offer people. You know, just you get this nice $1,200 a month apartment, 2 bedrooms. You know, are you willing to spend another $100 for a garage space down in the basement? So, you know, anyway, that was kind of how the whole concept came, and why that side, you know, is higher. We also put a little bump roof and some decks on that side to kind of soften, you know, the wall, even though, you know, it's probably only 32 feet to the eaves, the lower eaves, but still, that will help soften it with a small.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Laverdiere? Ms. Ford?
Yeah, how is this being presented as a site plan review? Is that what the intention?
Yeah, it will be. We're not sure how the subdivision
Ms.
control
Brestro?
law will play into it.
Right now, you are only looking at an A&R plan. In fact,
Okay,
I
well-
haven't even shown you the A&R plan yet.
Yeah, no, because it's very.
And
yeah.
there was a little bit of cart before the horse here, maybe, or I'm not exactly sure what the issue was. But when Mr. Laverdiere initially proposed this building, it did not have underground parking. And so he was fairly far along in his process with the Conservation Commission and moving into submitting plans to you for site plan review. And then he became aware that he wanted to put these underground parking spaces in there. So he went to the building commissioner and said, you know, I'd like to do this. And the building commissioner said, well, the building's going to be too tall. So between the two of them, they came up with a solution, reading footnote B, which I had pointed out to the zoning subcommittee before as having some potential misinterpretations possible. Anyway, when you read footnote B, it
There'll be a
looks
quiz
like...
on it in just a minute.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, so what?
Well, no, it's just, I'm not familiar with the site. I have no idea. I mean, I'm an architect, and I
well,
can't
what
tell
you're-
what's the front or the back or where this is located. So I'm just trying to find out when we're going to see that.
Yeah, I think the short answer here is not to let that cart get any further in front of the horse at all
Yeah.
right now. I mean, this is irrelevant in the context of our discussion. I think we just
Yeah.
need to talk about the A&R, which I think we don't even need to talk about anyway, right? It's being withdrawn.
Oh, but why
I was just trying to, you know, share.
Yeah,
the
yes.
journey.
Yeah, I want to make sure that we don't get too far into looking at the plan that really, as far as we're concerned, isn't a plan yet until you bring it to us as a site plan review.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were intending to do that, Nick, actually on the 20th, but because of this little snafu, it get moved back another 2 weeks.
Great.
And I know you're busy with all the zoning stuff, and you know, this isn't a BBC. And it just kind of, I thought it was appropriate for this particular
Yep,
evening to
thank you.
actually chat a little about it.
Yep, Ms. Brestro.
So the bottom line is, Mr. Laverdiere is requesting that his application for an A&R plan be withdrawn. He's brought a letter to you, which I will pass around, and according to town council, you need to vote to, you know, take an action on this request for withdrawal.
We do not approve the approval not required.
One more fact is that tomorrow is day 21, and the plan would be constructively granted if you were not to go along with this request for withdrawal. So,
Is there any,
He has to do
is
it.
there any further discussion on the, or questions on the request for withdrawal?
Actually, that's
I'd like to see the letter.
Sorry?
I'd like to see it.
Is there a way that we can see what we're not approving?
yes.
What you're-
I had a question for you, Mr. Laverdiere. Just, it fits in with a lot of the things we were talking about earlier this evening before you were here about the zoning, and you had mentioned if the zoning changes were to come about that would work for this building.
This building would
Yet
work.
you weren't here to comment either positively or negatively about those changes, and so we are trying to gather information, and this is another case where what we have on the books may not get us the results we want, or
Yeah,
so forth.
yeah.
And I believe there's a height waiver possible under a special permit, but, so one option is to, with a different kind of permit, you could or could not change the height? Is that, if that's the problem here? I don't, just curious.
Mr. Laverdiere, before you respond to that, I'd actually like to kind of shut down that line of discussion, because we did have a public hearing about the zoning articles, and
Would it be fair to talk about it?
to continue the conversation outside the context of the public hearing, I think doesn't respect the process of that. So, while those questions are interesting, we should probably explore them when we have the public hearing for the site plan review, or during one of the zoning hearings.
You're right, probably, except that we did allow him to make some comments about why he was here before.
Yes, but in the context of his project more than the context of the zoning, so.
I respect your request, but
And I see where you're coming from.
Withdrawal of Plan A is just the site plan application.
Not the site plan, the
Drawing the A&R plan? It says A.
Withdrawal.
I have the letter here.
Form A, Form A, yeah.
Who has the
It
letter?
went
I
this
have the
way.
letter.
It's coming back. It's over there.
Form A plan is the same as an A&R. Does that answer the question? Yes,
So
it's the
he's-
same.
So he's withdrawing the request for A&R?
He's withdrawing this application, and he's asking you to approve the withdrawal of this application without prejudice.
Yeah, obviously I would have moved forward if town council had.
There's a question about what the forms and what the form that, there was an application for subdivision approval, and that's what's being withdrawn? Instead, there's an A&R request?
No, he has not submitted anything on subdivision. This is a Form A application. It says Form A, and then it says approval not required, which is the same as A&R.
Yeah.
So the Form A and the A&R are the same.
Okay.
And he's asking to withdraw his application so that he doesn't get potentially stuck with a property that isn't conforming to what he needs to get through the site plan review process. He may come back with this at a future date, but for right now, he doesn't want to.
Oh, you're not today requesting?
Today, he's requesting to withdraw his application.
What's before us is a request to withdraw. Is that something that you're
No, that's fine.
questioning?
No, just why the site plan was, even being shown in that case.
Well, because I believe it's because the request was filed.
Yeah.
So, which generated the A&R that
Okay.
is before us, and now he's requesting to withdraw that.
What would happen is if you approve the A&R, let's say it accidentally got approved, we would be creating a building without frontage, and we're not sure whether that is legal right now. The 433, the existing building on that lot, would then effectively have no frontage. And we would then be creating a non-conforming structure accidentally because we thought a right-of-way was effective as a means
Yep.
entrance.
I think we've got that. Are you
Okay, that's
satisfied,
what I just
Mr.
tried to-
Rosnoy?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the withdrawal of the Form A application without prejudice.
Is there a second? Further discussion? All in favor of the motion to approve the withdrawal? Opposed? Abstentions? That is a 8-0 vote in favor.
Thank you anyway, I didn't mean to cause all this ruckus here.
Thank
but
you.
I just wanted to kind of give you sort of a little history and then show you what the history was kind of about. We'll have site, obviously people on site get to see it.
Yep, thank you, and we'll look forward to seeing the project. It looks very interesting.
I'm looking forward to it too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a nice evening.
Thanks, you too.
Okay. We still have before us under old business, we need to sign the decision for the Wildwood Daycare Center.
And may I also pass around the minutes and ask Mr. O'Keefe to sign the minutes in place of
certainly
Mr.
may.
Weber? So there are two documents that are coming around. One is a decision and one is the minutes.
While we sign that, did we have anything not reasonably anticipated under old business?
No?
Okay, I will pause for a moment while I affix my signature to this. Oops. Okay. Planning board schedule and agenda for upcoming meetings. We've already established that we are meeting next on March 20th, 2 weeks from tonight, and we have already continued our two of our public hearings from this evening to that date. What else do we have to look forward to on the 20th, Ms. Brestrup?
You have a presentation by Dave Zomek, who's the chairperson of the Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods Working Group. He would like to come and explain to you where they are with that and seek your feedback on their document as it will exist at that time. They met yesterday and they really made a lot of progress, and so they will be having a new document coming out.
Terrific, we'll look forward to that.
Oh, it's okay?
Go ahead.
May I mention one other thing? The town has also received a request to withdraw property owned by Coles, W.D. Coles, and it's up between Market Hill Road and Henry Street. You may have read about it in the paper. This is a request that will come to you, and you will be asked to recommend to the select board whether you think this property, whether the town should exercise its right of first refusal. It is currently being looked at by town council. The request is being looked at by town council. So it could come to you as early as March 20th, and it might not be until April until you see that.
Okay, thank you. All right, did you have anything else under schedule and agenda? Yes.
Just
go ahead.
one other thing. Mr. Weber had said a few weeks ago that he wanted the master plan implementation committee to be discussed on March 20th, so you might want to think about that and what your approach to that is going to be.
Okay. Any topics not reasonably anticipated under new business?
No.
Any Form A, A&R subdivision applications for us to approve or disallow?
No.
Upcoming ZBA applications?
No, none that I know of.
Upcoming applications for us?
This particular application that you
That's
just
the
heard
only one in
about.
the pipeline?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay. We move on to committee and liaison reports. PVPC, Mr. Schreiber.
PVPC met last week, and the main topic was the HUD-funded Sustainable Knowledge Corridor update. So some of the drafts of their report have been released, and it's quite interesting. So they've developed lots and lots of maps on various things from social justice, relationships of where brownfields are, and access to transportation, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really worth looking at these reports for all of the kind of mapping and analyses that they've done. So I will send a link to Chris, who then can hopefully send a link to all of you. They went through the top 10 resolves, so our proposal to change resolve number 6 was basically addressed. So they did approve a modified version that makes it a priority to look at the northeast New England Central Railroad corridor, basically from Palmer through Amherst up to Northfield as part of this greater inland route. So that's a big step in the right direction for those who would like to see rail maintained on the New England Central Railroad corridor. So that's it.
Great, thank you. CPAC, Ms. Anderson.
Yes, CPAC met last week, and they're going to have an extra meeting because they are not finished, I should say we, are not finished deliberating. It's the classic, I think there's about 1.1 million in requests for CPA funds, and with obligations of, the third year of 10-year, we have some 3 or 4 obligations that are spaced out over a number of years. We have less than 500,000 to give. So, and there's everything from preserving Emily Dickinson's dress to building a lifeguard stand at Mill River and everything in between. So there's a lot, there's several, actually 2 big land purchases. When you mentioned about the right of first refusal for conservation, there are 2 properties that are up for, that have requested funding, and they have deadlines, they can get matching grants. Very interesting. So, but I don't want to, and more information was needed from various groups. So everybody's represented. It's a very interesting group because Amherst, the Historical Society, the Historical Commission rates their requests from everybody. And so anyway, the next meeting is March 14th. And at that time, we'll make the final deliberations, and I'll present something to you after that. But right now, it's still, just some basic things have been approved, like, as I said, year 3 of a 10-year obligation, that sort of thing. But the bulk of it has not. Very interesting this year. It's very, very interesting. And it was reminiscent, the meeting last week, excuse me, of my first meeting on planning board, which was, I don't know, seems like 100 years ago now. But if you recall, we were having the discussion of the mosque in Pelham. And do you remember our standing room only crowd? Well, CPAC, which is not a very contentious group at all, because we kind of just give away money, it was standing room only. And I walked in, I went, uh-oh, something's up. And it was very interesting. So that's why I have nothing to report until after the 14th. But, and it is not televised, sadly, because it would have been very interesting. It is at 7 o'clock right here.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Ms.
And while I have the floor, the Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods, I somehow missed the boat that there was a meeting yesterday. I am on that committee, and I was hoping Mr. Tucker would still be here to update us, unless you were there, Chris, I don't know. But Mr. Zomack, the chair, will be here in 2 weeks. Will give a much better summary than I could, so.
Great, thank you. All right, Mr. Rosnow, would you like to tell us about all the work that the Transportation Plan Task Force has been doing since our last meeting?
I wish I could.
But you can't. That's okay, because Ms. Kruger will tell us all about what the ARA has been doing.
They've probably been hanging out someplace warm with the Transportation Committee.
Anything from Design Review Board?
No, we have not met since the last planning board meeting.
Ms. Kruger, did you have anything additional on housing and sheltering?
I was really glad that Mr. Crowner could also be at the presentation last night. I'm not sure we'll be able to have the consultants come because I don't know if the scope, they're set for excellent, but we could certainly have representatives from the Amherst Housing and Sheltering Committee, who sponsors this plan, come and maybe present their findings. But I do find our need for housing very compelling, and we had a couple of people who came last night, came specifically because of their concern. One was a resident there, very concerned about the displacement at Echo Village, which is not a subsidized project. There's no legal tools that we know of, at least not right now, to keep people in place at the current rents that they're paying. So the reality of placing 19 Section 8 households within the town at rents that the Housing Authority is allowed to pay, and then there's another additional, so it's 5 non-subsidized families. So it seems like one step forward, one step, 2 steps back, because it's another kind of housing emergency to be dealt with, and it's very difficult. Doesn't the town care? What's the town doing about this? How come there aren't solutions, both legal and land use and housing? And then we have other perspectives here that are also valid about what will happen if we do create possibilities to offer more housing. So for me, when I talk about more housing, I'm thinking about people who are struggling to stay in this town, and not to ignore that we also need student housing, but for me, it's very real and present that we don't have enough family housing, whether it's subsidized and those restrictions are there for the long term, or whether it's out there in the marketplace. Rents are just skyrocketing, and it has huge impacts on our ability to have a diverse community.
Thank you for that, and thank you for the suggestion about having perhaps members of the committee come in and talk to us. I think once they wrap up the plan, I think that would be a good idea. If we can't have the consultants, it would be good to sit down with them at some point in the relatively near future. Okay, we already heard from Safe and Healthy.
But, Mr. Chair, I think Chris had her hand up in response to this.
Someone asked about what Safe and Healthy had concentrated on yesterday, and they talked mostly about the process that the building commissioner would go through when he got a complaint about a property, and it was a very clear process. And they also talked about the potential for fines, the potential for court appearances, court lawsuits, and suspending any kind of permit or license that might be granted. So there was a lot of discussion about that, and much was heard from many different sides, including people who manage properties. So I think it was a very good discussion.
Thank you. And again, Mr. Zomek will be here at our next meeting to talk to us in more detail about those issues. Okay, the chair has no report. Did you have anything additional for us, Ms. Brestrup?
I do not.
Then we move on to item 12 on our agenda. All in favor of adjournment, please rise.
May I just apologize to you for the confusion on that A&R plan? I wasn't expecting to get into that much detail.
That was the second most exciting A&R discussion we've had.
The second most exciting,
The most exciting one was one on Heatherstone.